This program has been made possible in part by the following sponsors. The Trial Lawyers Association of BC. The Vancouver Courier newspaper. KCM Wealth Management. Here are some simple facts about justice in the province of British Columbia. We rank 10th out of 13 provinces and territories in terms of legal aid funding. We spend 1% of our budget on justice in this province. And in the last decade, we have slashed $113 million in budget expenditures. So it really leaves us wondering where we're going to go in terms of justice in this province. It's a complicated story, but we've got the right person to share it with us, and that is Kerry Simmons, who is the president of the Canadian Bar Association BC branch. Kerry, great to see you. Thank you so much. You folks just put out this call for action. You were saying just before we came on air, you're getting a bit of traction. I was surprised, to tell you the truth. I don't expect much of politicians these days.
Well, the Bar Association has, over the last few years, been working on suggestions for law reform and justice reform in the province. And we know we have a crisis, not only because of the funding cuts, but because we have delays in our court system. And, you know, not a day goes by where we're not reading a story about a delay or some dissatisfaction with someone's experience.
Right.
So what the Bar Association decided to do was put together some solutions, and we call it an Agenda for Justice, and we launched it last month.
Yeah, it's pretty comprehensive. I mean, you've covered just about every territory imaginable, except one that I'm gonna natter about it as we get into this. But just give us the broad general strokes to start with. You talk about families, communities, business.
And also general accountability to the public.
Yes.
And the idea is that we've put together some suggestions for reforms to our justice system, as well as no-cost or low-cost legislative reforms, because we know that there's not a lot of money in our province to spend on things, but there are things that we can do and things that are important to do.
Now, I think that was one of the best things you did in this Agenda for Justice. It would be almost predictable and relatively easy for a group to say, look, the government isn't holding up, they have to spend more money. But what you folks have done is you said, yeah, there's money that needs being spent, but here's a bunch of pretty reasonably priced things that we can do.
Right.
Some of them don't cost a darn thing.
This is true.
Yeah.
This is true, and we did this now because we have an election coming up in this province.
Yes,
and
we noticed.
and I'm sure everybody has. Yeah. And we wanted to make sure that justice was on the minds of the parties and the candidates who are running to be our representatives in Victoria. So we thought if we pull this together now and present it and meet with every single candidate who is running for election and tell them what the solutions are, maybe when they're elected, they'll put some of these things in place.
You know, lawyers are the butt of many easy jokes, but I think, honestly, you folks should be given a citation as Citizens of the Year. I mean this seriously, for calling attention to politicians who are now going to fight for votes. Because I guarantee you, none of them would have thought of justice issues unless somebody reminds them. And I think it's wonderful that you've reminded them.
Well, we're happy to have this opportunity at this point to do that. Because it's important.
Okay, let's tackle some of the issues. Let's talk about families. Custody. I'm kind of shocked by some of the numbers you've thrown out in terms of kids waiting for endless months to find out where they're living next week.
Well, what we know is in our provincial court system, where a lot of our family disputes go, where people can't resolve them on their own and they need a judge to help tell them what's going to happen, they can wait for a period of time as their case moves through the court. And what we want to do is shorten up that time period. And one of the ways we are suggesting would be to fund legal aid. Legal aid provides legal representation or legal information to people who have legal problems. But the problem right now is that they don't help people with family law problems. They can't provide legal representation on a continual basis for people with family problems. There's duty counsel, and duty counsel is a lawyer who's in the courtroom that you could go up and ask questions of and have them help you in that moment. But there aren't lawyers available to help people plan or think about ways to resolve their disputes before they get there.
Are you telling me that legal aid has existed in this province for many years, but primarily for criminal and civil matters, but not for family matters?
No, in the last 10 years, the funding to our Legal Services Society has reduced every year.
Okay.
And as a result, they are unable to provide services to family law matters, a wide range of family law matters. They still are able to provide assistance where there's child protection issues. A child's been apprehended from their parents.
Right.
Or if there are threats of violence. But the routine things like somebody who needs to find out how much child support needs to be paid. Those sorts of everyday type of problems, there isn't enough money in legal services to help those people on a day-to-day basis.
You also have some shocking numbers, starting with family matters, but also in criminal and civil cases, about how many large percentages of people represent themselves because they don't have legal representation.
That's right.
I have to tell you honestly, I thought I was informed, but I'm shocked by these numbers.
And what happens when we have more people unrepresented in court is that it takes longer for their cases to move through the system because they don't understand the law as much, or they're not sure how to present their case. And so it takes longer for their case to go through the system, which contributes to this overall delay. And then others get frustrated because their cases aren't moving, their disputes aren't being resolved. Businesses get frustrated because they're waiting to get their small claims dispute through the court on the civil side.
And they can't maintain the business. One of the things that does come up in this very comprehensive report, the Agenda for Justice, is that you talk about the fallout costs, the social welfare costs, the mental breakdown costs, the alcoholism, addiction, and so on, because people are under tremendous stresses. You know, I think the justice system is something like hospitals. Most of us think we're never going to get there. And most of us end up there in one form or another.
This is true. One of the things that we've learned over the last few years is that in a 3-year period, 45% of British Columbians are going to intersect with our justice system.
Wow.
That's more than what many people think. And so if you think about the fact that that many people are going to be involved with our justice system, yet we only spend 1%, as you said in your opening, 1% of our overall province's expenditures is in justice, that just doesn't quite seem to be proportionate.
If you were that other person right now, Madam Premier, what number would you, pluck a number out of the air, 3%, 5%?
You know, it's not necessarily about the percentage. It's about what actually is going to be happening. In this most recent budget, the Ministry of Justice expenditures were again reduced. And so it's hard to have a lot of these things like legal aid be improved in getting more services to people when we're in those circumstances.
Not that you should be in the minds of you know, the folks who make this stuff up, but what are they thinking? I mean, how can you, in what ways can you reduce those costs? I appreciate that all governments, Obama is the greatest example, you know, are struggling mightily to try to rein in costs or bring down costs. Well, good luck. What are you going to do? You're going to fire frontline workers?
The important thing to remember is that if we don't have a functioning justice system, we don't have businesses coming to the province and wanting to set up business, because when they get into disputes, we don't have a functioning system.
Right.
Families get discouraged because if they can't resolve things themselves, then they've got to go into a court system where there's delay. So it's important that we properly fund our justice system, our legal aid system, so that people have confidence in our justice system, that they can go there when they need to and have a judge decide what should happen.
In spite of the fact that we've closed 24 courts around the province in the last year or so, you've said clearly in this agenda that this is not about bricks and mortar. It's about other kinds of resources, and not necessarily greenbacks. It's also about people. It's about human resources. But they cost money, don't they? I mean, every court clerk must be paid.
This is true.
Yeah.
But if you have a problem, a legal problem, and you
Yes.
need to go and file a court document that allows you to bring your problem to the court's attention, you are going to go to a court registry, and there's going to be a court services employee who takes your document. But if there aren't very many court services employees, people have retired and we haven't replaced them in,
Yes.
in a courthouse, then you're going to have to wait to file your document. And even just something simple as waiting in line for 45 minutes to get up to the wicket in order to be able to present your document, that's frustrating too.
Hey, I'm just looking at these numbers that I referred to earlier but didn't name. 90 to 95% of British Columbians in family court cases unrepresented, 40% unrepresented in criminal cases, 90% unrepresented in civil court cases. When I take my car to the dealership because something's broken, I don't want to know how they fix it. I know nothing about cars. Ditto the computer. I don't want to learn MS-DOS, right? I just want the computer to operate, okay? I can barely manage that. Similarly, if I have to go to court, I mean, I know my own experience in a divorce 25 years ago. It was relatively civilized in terms of my ex-wife and I, but the experience was a nightmare. And I didn't understand 90% of the language being used. So how could I go in, if I had a divorce to deal with today, how could I go in and represent myself? And I'm a highly articulate person.
Well, that's why I started to become a lawyer, because I wanted to help people navigate that court system and learn the language of law. So that's the role that a lawyer can help provide to other people. But again, if we don't have a legal aid system that can provide people with those lawyers, it gets even more frustrating, and we end up with the statistics that you've just quoted.
Yeah, they're nightmarish, aren't they? They're they're very bad numbers. Do you believe that legal aid is an idea that's broadly accepted by, let's take some categories of people, lawyers, by politicians, by public servants?
I think those groups that you've identified understand that legal aid has a role to play. But more importantly to me is that British Columbians believe that legal aid has a place in our society.
Yes.
We did some research a couple of years ago and asked people about their views of legal aid, and we learned that when people understand what legal aid does and who it can help, and it can help women and children and people accused of crimes and people who are having trouble navigating the system, when they hear that, they say, yes, we should have a system that helps those people who are in those circumstances.
I wonder if people have a sense of history of what courts might have been 500 years ago or even 100 years ago.
Right.
Yeah.
Very different 100 years ago.
Yeah, it's a totally different story. We'll take a little breather. Folks, the court is in recess for a moment here. Give us a chance to remind you that davidberner.com is the site to visit. We're always happy to receive your comments. And take a moment for these lovely folks to say hello, the people who support this program here on Shaw Community Television, Cable 4. Back in a minute. This program has been made possible in part by the following sponsors. The Trial Lawyers Association of BC. The Vancouver Courier newspaper. KCM Wealth Management. All right, we're back with our guest, Kerry Simmons, who is the current president of the Canadian Bar Association BC branch. And that August group has just released a document called An Agenda for Justice, and they are challenging the folks who want your vote from all and any parties to stand up and be counted and say what role they think justice has to play for the citizens of British Columbia and how much we're prepared to spend on it, where we're going to make some improvements. Look, here's something that I literally didn't understand because I don't know the territory. One of the things you recommended is amending the Family Compensation Act to provide for bereavement damages in the event of a death of a family member, etc. But you just explain that to me, because I don't know what that means.
Sure. The Agenda for Justice includes a number of different legislative reforms, so
Right.
changes to our laws that govern certain pieces. And each one of them is in some cases very detailed and for some a little esoteric.
Yeah, somewhere, yeah.
But this one here has to do with what happens where a loved one has been killed, passed away, in circumstances where somebody else is at fault, and the family has rights to claim damages for the loss of that family member.
Okay.
So what we're suggesting is that the kinds of damages, money,
Yes.
that could be offered in compensation to the family be expanded to include bereavement damages. So that's a really unfortunate situation for any family to be in. And we know that no amount of money would compensate them for the loss of a loved one. But it is a piece of that particular law that if you included bereavement damages, it would offer a little bit more.
Your spouse is driving home, and he or she is killed in a car crash, and it turns out that the other person not only was at fault, but was drunk or something.
Something like that.
Yeah. So not only would all of the usual things attend to that, you're also saying with this change in legislation, the bereaved person, the grieving person could now claim for further damages
Right.
Against that third party.
That's right.
Does that exist in many other jurisdictions in the world?
That's one that exists in a different form across the country.
Okay.
And so we are looking to add something there. And that's been a topic of conversation within the Justice Ministry and with some members of the Legislative Assembly. So that is an idea that may actually come to resolution, and we might see some changes there.
How, if at all, would that affect ICBC? Because ICBC is the next thing I want to talk about. Because I'm looking at this poor person who is responsible for the death of another, and as if that's not bad enough,
Right.
now this person is slapped with some sort of a suit, a bereavement suit for damages of $1 million. Where does this person come up with $1 million?
Right.
Does this end this person's life as he or she knew it?
Well, that's part of how laws apply to these different situations. There's a balancing of considerations there. So
Yeah.
that's a fairly detailed example of,
Yes.
of what could happen. And I can't get into the details of all of those particular pieces. But it is something that if the government of the day decided to change the law, it would improve the lives of some British Columbians.
You're
for
saying
sure.
at least that option should be there.
That's right.
Yeah, okay. So thank you for that. Now, amend the Motor Vehicle Act to remove the Insurance Corporation of BC's discretion to, now this is unbelievable, I didn't even know, to withhold driver's licenses from persons who've declared bankruptcy. I don't understand what bankruptcy has to do with the ability to drive a car. And I don't understand why ICBC should be given this kind of judiciary power. It seems to be completely inappropriate.
So you might be able to help join us in convincing other people that that should be changed.
Yeah.
But that's an example of, if somebody has declared bankruptcy and they've gone through the process, which is allowed for in
Yes.
our laws, that sometimes if you're not able to pay all your debts, you can be declared bankrupt. And then as you put your life back together and become contributing and earn a living,
Yes.
you should at least have your driver's license, because how else are you going to get to and from work if you're in an area where there isn't transit?
How else are you looking for work?
That's true.
You got job interviews,
That's true.
Right?
So that's another sort of easier fix, so to speak, than some of the other things that we've got in here.
Quick story. When I was 15, I worked in an insurance brokerage. My job was to write up driver's policies, okay? Guy comes in, wants insurance. I write it up, we send it to the insuring company. Week later, this is a long time ago, comes back, we won't insure him. You know why? You won't believe this. Divorced. So I go in and I see the general manager, and I say, what's this? And he stares at me like this 15-year-old kid, and he says, you know what, you're right. He picks up the phone, has this big fight with the insurance company. They covered the guy, okay? But their thinking was some actuary sitting in a tower somewhere had determined that if you were divorced, you were sad and you were drunk, probably, and so you were a bad driver's risk. Meanwhile, half the country's getting divorced.
Well, it shows you how times have changed.
Yeah.
And there's an example of how our laws changed to match what is happening in our society.
Exactly.
So that's the other piece that our agenda looks at. For example, we know that we have an aging population.
Yes.
And that there are a number of people who are or may in the future be living in one of the residential care facilities in the province.
I'm moving in here. They make me a room for me right here.
There you go, in the studio.
That's my new care worker. Yeah.
And the ombudsperson did a review of our residential care facilities run by the province and made a number of recommendations of improvements and changes that could be made to improve the quality of life and the independence of people who live in those homes. And we have endorsed many of her recommendations.
Including the whole issue of you can't move me just because I'm 76 or 83. You can't move me from care facility A to care facility G without my consent.
That's right. If you have the ability to give your consent, you should be consulted. Except if there's an emergency, there's a fire and we have to move people, that's one thing. But you should be able to be consulted and give your consent about whether or not you're going to move.
I don't want to be mean about care facilities, but I can tell you from personal knowledge that many, will say, well, that person can't think clearly, he's 86, or whatever.
Well, we have rules with respect to how people's how their competence is assessed and whether or not they can make those decisions. But maybe there's a family member who has been given the power to make decisions for that person. Yeah. Well, that family member, in place of that person, should still be asked and consented to.
You are lobbying with government people and with people who are running for office now. You're lobbying to have these kinds of structural changes amended, yes?
We've talked to both the policy leaders in the Liberal Party and in the New Democratic Party, and we've presented this agenda to them. We've asked them to consider it and include some of these things in their policy documents that I hope we'll be seeing soon. Well, and you're right, we're also talking to all the candidates.
I want to congratulate you that you found the Liberal members. I thought most of them were hiding at the moment. Okay, here's my personal shtick about justice. How do we get psychiatry out of the courts? How do we reduce the role of psychiatry, what I think is meddling, you may not agree with me, meddling in the courts, especially in criminal cases, going on and on and on about this person, is an unhappy person, and so that's why he had to stab someone 47 times. Or this person cut off a guy's head, and so we'll just, we'll give him some drugs and some therapy, and 6 years later we'll declare that he's no risk to anybody. Excuse me?
Well, that's an interesting, it's a really interesting perspective.
I know I threw a big bagel at you, but yeah.
But here's the thing, human beings are very complex.
True.
And when a judge is going to make a decision, they need to have as much information as reasonably possible to make a good decision that protects our society, assists a person who they found has been guilty of a crime, and they need to have a more holistic view. So I don't know that the answer is to get rid of psychiatry, as you suggested. Yeah. I think that it's a necessary part to understand the whole picture of the person who's there. That's why our community courts work very well, because our community courts that are based in Vancouver and Victoria look at the whole person and what they really need. It's not just the isolated justice crime incident.
No, I understand that. So I've given you a very, what's the word?
Extreme.
Thank you. I've given you a very extreme position. Let's move a little more to the middle. Would you agree that this is an area that needs to be talked about a bit more deeply thought out? Because I think there are some real iniquities that show up. I agree that like drug courts and so on are wonderful if and when they work. If we really have the resources, we often don't. If we really do say to people, look, you're going into recovery work or you're going to jail, those are your choices. I'm all for that. Got it, okay? But people who cross a certain barrier of inhumanity, people who commit really extreme violent crimes and so on, maybe this needs a deeper examination. Anyway, it's not your bailiwick.
But
Yeah.
here's what I'd have to say about that.
Yeah.
You're suggesting a conversation to examine what can be done in those circumstances.
Yeah.
And that kind of conversation is the good conversation to have.
I think
and
so.
that's what the agenda is saying. We
Yeah.
need to have these conversations about how to solve the problem and then actually take action to solve them.
Okay, we've got about 2 minutes left. Give me a couple more of the things that you really want to see happen.
Sure.
If you had a real tight, short list, on your magic wand list, what would they be?
It would be to increase funding to legal aid.
Yeah.
One of the incremental steps is to reestablish Lawline. Lawline is
Oh,
a
yes.
telephone advice service
Yes, yes.
that people can call up and get some advice from a lawyer about what they should do in their situation. That would be a very straightforward step to do, and it would cost less.
When you say reestablish, you mean we had it and we dropped it?
If we had it and the funding was reduced, and so it had to be dropped.
Yes.
So that would be one piece of the puzzle. The next piece would be to put in some serious money into legal aid so we could have people get that representation in family matters like we were
Yes.
talking about earlier.
Yeah.
We would also like to see a fixed complement of judges. In other words, we need to know how many judges our courts actually need.
We don't know?
Right now, the chief judge has said this is what I think the number is, but the
Yes.
government hasn't necessarily agreed with that. So what we're saying is let's stop arguing about that. Let's
Yes.
identify a formula that determines what that number is.
Sure.
And then when we fall short of that number, appoint the judge quickly. Because when we don't have enough judges, that's another delay that results.
Yeah. Justice delayed is justice denied.
That's right.
It's got to be relatively expedient. It's got to show up.
That's right. And these are, everything in the agenda is moving towards improving our system and giving some solutions that we can work on.
Well, again, Kerry, congratulations to Canadian Bar Association, BC branch, for doing this groundwork and for pushing the politicians to make some decisions.
Thank you.
I think it's great. I think it's a real good act of citizenship.
That's the idea. We've got all these volunteers working on this together.
Lovely. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Okay, that's it for us for the moment. I'm going out to fight with a psychiatrist. DavidBerger.com is our site. We're happy to hear from you at any time. A reminder that next week we're going to focus on the changing workplace. We have a delightful lady joining us who's an expert in human resources. She's a consultant. So that's it for us. We thank you for being with us here on Shaw Community Television, Cable 4. Good night.